Affordable Care Act. Valerie Jarrett sent out a tweet last night saying nothing in the Affordable Care Act is requiring any of these changes. And I'd like to see if you could just understand how many of the American public would say, wait a minute, the law itself creates the means by which the administration judges whether an individual insurance policy has changed sufficiently to meet the standards, meaning if you're after the grandfathering period and something about the coverage changed, then the administration can judge whether or not that qualifies for the grandfathering exemption. So the administration is involved in evaluating whether or not this coverage does or does not meet the standards and whether people have to receive a cancellation notice. Is that not true?
Well, let's be clear. That would be true a year from now or 5 years from now. If an insurer put forward a plan and asked if it met the standards and it did not meet the standards, you know, it didn't provide maternity care or it didn't provide mental health services or it tried to impose annual caps or something like that, the answer would be no, that didn't meet the standards. So the only thing that could be done when the law was written is that
the regulations enforce them, right?
Well, right. And so, but the point that she was making and that I and others made last night and I'm making today is that as written, the law granted a grandfather status to individuals who had insurance on the individual market before the passage of the Affordable Care Act and kept that insurance and wanted to keep it for as long as they were alive if the insurer wanted to have them on that plan. But if the insurer last year or the year before or earlier this year told, let's say it's you, that guess what, your plan that you signed up for a year, we're changing.
Has a higher premium or a
reduced benefits or anything.
And then the administration steps in and says,
the administration doesn't
that
step
to be
in.
a
The insurance
significant
company understands and has understood since the
that to be a
passage.
significant enough change, and so now that's no longer grandfathered. That's the process, is it not?
Well, in terms of the agency here, I think the insurer is making the decision to basically cancel the plan and reissue or offer the individual a new plan with different benefits or different costs. So that's the insurer makes that call and made that call over the course of since the passage of the Affordable Care Act. And then individuals on this very volatile and difficult market made the decision as to whether to continue on that plan or to see if there was anything else available to them in this difficult market that will be vastly improved come January 1st. So it's important to remember, both before the ACA was ever even a gleam in anybody's eye, let alone passed into law, that insurance companies were doing this all the time, especially in the individual market, because it was lightly regulated and the incentives were so skewed. That will change and is changing. And I think to credit the insurers, you are seeing, and they deserve this, because you are seeing them actively solicit customers to the new offerings that they have that meet the general minimum requirements of the Affordable Care Act, that provide these basic services and which allow individuals on this market to shop around in a way that they couldn't before, and then look at the tax credits that may be available to them, up to half of them, based on some of the analysis out there, and which would result in many cases in insurance coverage that is far superior and cheaper than what they had before, if they had it.
So, to summarize, one of the goals was to essentially get rid of this Wild West, as you described, to eradicate the individual market and all the vagaries.
No. In fact, we're expanding vastly the individual market. We're just the Affordable Care Act.
To pick up on Jim's question, there are, as you said, some people who choose not to have coverage because they don't think it applies to them. In some cases, it absolutely doesn't apply to them, or they're accepting the risk of not taking on certain coverage. And those consumer decisions are being flattened in order to conform with the law. That's true, is it not?
I guess I follow you. But on the question that Jim raised, and that I think you just raised again, are there young invincibles out there, 27-year-olds, and for example, because up to 26 now, thanks to the affordable.
54-year-old who doesn't need maternity coverage.
Well, there are basic requirements of the Affordable Care Act for basic coverage in a plan, and mental health services, and not being able to be kicked off for a pre-existing condition or denied coverage. The list is long, and it is important to many people who need that security. What is true is that, I mean, on the issue that Jim and you just raised on the so-called young invincibles, yes, if you're 27 or 28 and you think you'll never get hurt and you'll just depend on the emergency room if you do. The Affordable Care Act says you should be covered. But we had that debate, and that's a sincere and important debate to have. And the Affordable Care Act was passed into law, signed into law, upheld by the Supreme Court, and validated through a national election. Because we believe that the premise of that part of the Affordable Care Act is founded on the idea that the taxpayer should not foot the bill for the decisions by some to take that chance. Because you could be young and healthy at 27, or you could be like somebody roughly that age that I know very well who just found out he had cancer. And fortunately, he has coverage. So, and if you don't, and if you didn't, you would be faced with enormous expenses and probably substandard care. And a lot of those expenses potentially could be shifted onto taxpayers. The Affordable Care Act was designed to make the improvements necessary so that that kind of insecurity is no longer prevalent in so many Americans' lives.